Thank you. So for standing items, status updates, and maybe we could also introduce ourselves as we give them. Al and Natalie, I work at VMware and contributing to the lifecycle. I actually don't have a terribly exciting status update because I was on vacation last week and spent a lot of this week just doing some spec work and PR review. So I'll pass to someone else.
I can go next. My name is Emily. I work at VMware. I'm a maintainer on the implementation team and a core team member. My status update is I was very busy with non-Buildpacks stuff last week, so I haven't done a lot of things that are related to this group. That's been happening a lot lately, so Natalie and Jesse have really been running the show around here on the lifecycle side.
I don't know about that, at least on my side. My name is Jesse Brown. I work at Heroku, and I'm a recent maintainer to the Lifecycle project. And this week I worked on a couple of issues that were in the milestone, trying to kind of push that along so that we can cut a release so that so we can have a 011 release hopefully. But we'll discuss the merits of that, I guess, later today probably. And I have to leave here by in 30 minutes time, so I'll be a little short today.
I can go. I'm Micah Young. I work at VMware and work mostly on Windows container related stuff for Pack and Lifecycle. Most of what I've been working on is some changes to, well, mostly stemmed out of fixing the cache image bug where it's writing Linux images instead of Windows images for Windows. But two related PRs that are, mostly two related PRs out there. Changes to image util. One for the constructors, which I haven't touched too much, and the other for changing how our registry helpers work. I put an item on the list, but I can talk through some of the changes I was proposing for making some registries read-only, a little bit more secure by default, and then only being able to write to authenticated registry instances. All these are just test related, so I can go into more detail for my item on the agenda.
I'm Yael. I work with VMware mostly on the lifecycle. I mostly worked this week on the opt-in layer caching, made some more, refactoring, following others' feedback. So thank you for everyone who gave me feedback. It was great. And I started working on the spec to make some changes over there. Emily, I really need your help regarding this. So I hope that we can discuss it before you go.
I should have some time this afternoon.
Or, I put an item in this meeting. So, it's a general discussion about the spec. So, yeah. Thanks.
Sure. I can go. I'm Anthony. I work at VMware alongside some of these awesome co-workers here. So far, recently, I've been blowing up a little bit on the platform side, and I'm sort of coming to these meetings to be a little bit more well-rounded. I'm just trying to understand the implementation side a little bit more. So as far as progress done on stories, none from me yet.
Someday we'll
Joe,
steal you over to the lifecycle.
Hey, I'm Joe. I'm an architect at Salesforce. I'm on the core team. I think I'm technically not even on the sub team, but I just popped in today to nag some folks about stack packs.
I think that's everyone. So I guess let's move on to release planning. I could share my screen so we could look at the milestone together if that works out. Let me try to do that. Share the right one. Okay. So you want to be in. I move this thing here. I'm gonna be in 11O. So we have 7 closed issues, 8 still open, but most of them are being looked at. I think Jesse and I were talking yesterday. I think there's still some uncertainty about whether the moving analyzer before detector will go into this release. We kind of talked about some of the spec PR includes some things that aren't currently in the lifecycle PR. So I don't know if that invites further work on what Jesse's already done. Jesse, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think after some discussions the last couple of weeks, we decided to kind of push pause on the PR work to make sure that the spec PR came about and was reviewed. And Emily reviewed that initially a little bit, and so we added some fields that were missing to the spec PR. So I think the spec PR is in the case to be reviewed. I believe Joe already reviewed it. And on the implementation side, once that's approved, if it gets approved the way it is, then there's going to be some additional fields that need to be added to the analyzer, some additional flags. And that sort of brings up the question of, do we have to do the work that uses those flags in for 011O, or can we just like take in these flags and, create tickets for doing things like validating, like validating the caster or validating the additional registries, things like that.
I'd imagine that the spec says that the lifecycle is going to do certain things with those flags. We probably have to do it if we say we're implementing that API version, right?
I don't know if it says anything about that, like on the right now, because we don't really have like I guess the RFC talks about what we would do with those, but the spec is not currently talking about using all the flags. I don't think it has them there, but it doesn't really say what the purpose of them is.
I would rather like either split that spec PR into 2, one that could go into this API version and one that will go into the next one that also includes information about what the lifecycle is supposed to do with those flags, and then split the lifecycle into 2 if we actually wanted to split the work up. But I don't like the idea of having an API version that accepts a bunch of flags and then ignores them.
Yeah, it feels gross. So I think that's fine. I don't have a strong preference for the spec. I mean, I can back out some of the changes that I made to that if that's the direction we want to go, so that we can move analyze before detect kind of as is, if everyone's kind of okay with that once they look at the spec. But yeah, I don't have a strong preference there. I just want to push it forward.
I don't have a strong preference either. I think there are 2 options that work. We can either do it all in this version or split it into 2, but make sure the flags go in the version that has the behavior. And as the person who's owning this PR, it's up to you. Whichever one you want to do, I think will be fine.
Okay. Then I guess you were the one who looked at the spec and sort of suggested adding the fields from the RFC or splitting it out. So there's no pushback from you now on kind of taking those fields back out and putting up another spec PR for those fields built on this spec PR, I guess, which still needs to be reviewed by more people.
Yeah, I never felt like the whole RFC had to go into one API version in one PR. I just wanted to, when the PR first came in, there was stuff on the RFC that wasn't in the PR, but we also hadn't created issues for them. So I just want to make sure we're tracking it all.
All right, cool. I could rework that spec PR to kind of match the work that's actually already been done in this outstanding PR for the lifecycle, and then we can match that against this updated spec PR, and then the other spec PR we can match against the RFC bits that have not been implemented.
If you wouldn't mind just creating an issue that describes whatever's outstanding in the RFC that's not in the PR.
Will do.
I want to say, looking at the issues that are still open and like thinking about where each one is at, it feels like we could ship 011 like next week. You know? Does anyone disagree? Sorry, go ahead.
Just I mean, Dan is not here, but the issue that Dan is working on, I mean,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
it's a feature retry fetching, I think.
Maybe that's one we should put on the agenda to discuss, because Dan had kind of invited further conversation around that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one we could kick out if needed.
And sorry too, I may have missed it before. The bug that I'm currently working on isn't, we don't plan on getting it in for this lifecycle release. The mismatched cache image OSs.
Well, I forgot. Where is that one? Oh, we didn't put a milestone on it, I think. We were hoping to do it, and then we didn't put a milestone on it, and we forgot about it.
I mean, and I'm fine with whatever priority folks feel like it has. It's technically not broken. It's only that you can't pull these cache images, so it's not too egregious.
Maybe we can, if I remember correctly, I think you're kind of blocked on the moment for someone to review and approve your image util PRs. Is that correct?
It's a little intertwined, but yeah, for the most part, it's that. The second image util PR is not strictly necessary, but it enables test coverage back in lifecycle for the bug. So if we don't want to have test coverage, but we want to fix the bug, technically we don't even need any of these PRs, but it's just really a refinement on the interface between lifecycle and image util for creating these appropriate OS cache images.
I see.
But like I said, if it's not worth holding up the release, I think all this could come in either as a patch or whenever.
Do you want to say anything more about release planning before we move on? I have one more question. I think I actually put it as needs discussion, but it was this node identity-based authentication. Jesse and I were talking about it, and I don't know. So there's a PR here. I don't think we had an environment that we could use to verify that the Kate's chain is being used, and we were kind of wondering if we need to. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, how much are we testing GGCR? Like do we trust that adding the keychain will do whatever GGCR's keychain is supposed to do, since we're just sort of, it's default constructor, there's really no inputs, or yeah, how do we want to test this, I guess?
Given that it is GGCR functionality, I definitely don't think we need an automated test. If you wanted to do a manual test, I think the project has a GCP account, and if you ran Tecton there, you could probably set up a situation like this. Like maybe Javier's been working a lot on Tecton, so maybe like reaching out to him and working with him, it wouldn't be too much effort. But if it is, like, I'm okay trusting it as long as it doesn't break anything else, right?
I'm wondering for this particular issue, does it have to be on AWS, just based on this one line here, or could it be on any IaaS? If so, I have some case clusters. Maybe I could have a hand in acceptance.
Yeah, it can be on any of the major cloud providers. Like it has AWS, Google, and Azure loaded by default as like keychain credential providers, basically. Yeah, the things I would expect to see that would maybe be problematic would be the things like I found here, like the KH chain depends on a couple different libraries, one per provider, built by other people, and like the AWS one, for instance, used Klog, which then it threw a log that was like, yeah, something about deprecation in my cluster or something, right? It's some AWS something or another, and so I had to set the logger to discard it. But like the KH chain library doesn't use Klog; it's used by the implementation of the AWS credential provider. So like the Google one may use a different logger, which we might have to. It might also spew messages that we maybe are not expecting. That's the sort of thing that I would see coming from this if we don't sort of smoke test it.
Doesn't seem like the worst thing. Like if it prints a couple extra log messages, it's not great. And if we get the feedback, we could clean it up later. But I wouldn't like block merging it because we don't know.
Fair. Maybe Anthony, we can circle up later, talk about it. It might be possible. Oh,
Maybe I'll tag both of y'all on that PR to sort of get a plan forward, because I don't have the current I don't have a Google or EKS that I can actually test this with right now.
awesome. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all for release planning. Oh, I had one other thing real quick. I noticed that actually many of the issues that we have closed and are currently working on are still pending the final API spec. And I know we kind of said we wouldn't ship a life cycle until the spec had been finalized. At the same time, so I'm wondering if there's any way we can kind of expedite review and approval of the spec stuff. I believe we have a PR for everything except to Yael's point, we might make some changes to the opt-in layer caching one, but everything else should be open PR at the moment.
I'll have some time to look later this afternoon, and I'll also take the action of bothering Stephen until he looks later this afternoon as well.
Thank you. All right, I think that's really it for release planning. Next standing item is needs discussion, and I believe there's nothing there, so we can move on to our other standing item, RFCs that relate to the implementation team. We have one which came up in the working group yesterday for process-specific working dir. Do we want to discuss this one? Everyone aware of its existence?
I have not gotten the chance to read it yet. I'll put it on the to-do list. I can guess what it is from the title, though.
I was thinking about this. I remember, Emily, you had raised some concerns around the profile D and exec D needing a consistent directory. And I raised that in the working group. But then afterwards, I started thinking, like, you even have process specific exec D, right? Process specific profile D. So it kind of, that starts to feel even more complicated. And I don't know if that's something we need to look at more closely.
Yeah, I'm worried that on the if you're using a bash process, this might not work. It's fairly straightforward for a direct process because the only thing we execute in advance of the process is execd, and we start a separate process for each of those and collect the results and use it to set the environment in the final process. So we could, run each of those in whatever working dir the build pack wanted, and one build pack changing a process dir wouldn't affect other ones. But the way bash profiles run, we execute one big bash command that's like profile, profile, profile process, because you need the profiles to be running in the same shell as the process. So if you change the working dir of the process and profiles depend on that, things could get dicey. Like maybe we could do something very clever where we insert a bunch of CDs in our magic batch command or something, but it's definitely not as straightforward.
That's interesting because Forrest had mentioned that one of the motivators for having this feature is because right now they are doing CD into the directory for their start command. And he said, you know, this is a limitation if your stack doesn't have a shell, right? Well, in that case, you're going to use execd anyway. So maybe we could scope it to just that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, if we wanted to support it for only direct processes, it'd be much easier to think about.
Emily, I assume you're going to give that feedback when you get a chance to read it.
Yeah, well, I just have to run right now, guys. Sorry. See you all later. And Yael, I'm sorry we didn't get to your issue, but talk to me this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
I think that concludes our RFCs. And I know the next item is the topic you wanted to bring up.
We almost got there. Almost. It was so close. I can bring this up like in this forum. I hope that someone, I just wanted that Emily will be in this conversation because she put the first PR. But I would love to get, I mean, others' ideas and comments about my thoughts. Nolly, do you want to open the RFC or do you want me to share my screen?
Sure, I'll let you share.
Okay. So I'm working on the RFC that relates to the opt-in layer caching PR. We talked in this forum a few weeks ago about the 3 flags, launch, build, and cache, and all the options of like all the mutations that can be with the 3 flags. And I reviewed her PR, and I feel that there are some edge cases that do not appear here. And I think that the spec should be very clear and should contain even edge cases. That they're not actually that, I mean, not edge, but just a few cases, I mean, do not appear here. So if we're looking at the launch layers, the build layers, and the cache layers, then maybe I can pull the table that Nolly created after the discussion that we had a few weeks ago. So the first thought that I had was that under the launch layers here, I will explain everything that relates when launch equals true. It won't be that easy to write it because again, it really depends on the other 2 flags. But let's say it's possible. Then we have the same for build layers and cache layers. So there will be some overlaps between the cases because I think it's clear, right? Why there will be overlaps. So now my thoughts are, first of all, do we want to have this kind of overlaps? Do we really want to write about, I mean, when we're writing about launch layers, do we really want to write only when launch equals true? Or do we also want to specify what happens when launch equals false? Because I feel, I mean, I would be very thankful if I could just put something similar to this table in the spec. I think it would be, I mean, the best thing to do, but this is not the format that we're using. So anyway, I feel just a little bit stuck because what appears in the existing PR is not clear enough. I mean, I think it's not clear enough, but I'm not sure how to change it so it would be clear enough. So if anyone has some thoughts, I would love to know. Not everyone together.
I'm a very visual person, so just looking at that green-red matrix is actually super helpful, right? Embedding that in Markdown maybe a little tricky, but like that's the easiest thing for me to understand is an actual matrix with the lines. So I would recommend that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good to me too. I think it'd be nice to have, and it lets you can still kind of extend it with some caveats with like, asterisks and stuff if you need to with the footnotes. So like, I feel like it's probably the best way to visualize it for newcomers for sure. And even me, because I still don't know. I still don't understand the chart all the way, to be honest. I have to go reread it.
So it means just, I mean, you're talking about just changing the current format, just to have a table with, I mean, probably will change a little bit the table that's not like good, although it's great, but we'll make some small changes, but just put it here, right? This is what you're talking about. Okay, cool.
You could keep the text that's there. It could be like slightly
Yeah, of course.
better. It's almost like you're saying, here, I'm going to say it in words. And now I'm going to say it in a picture. And like people can kind of take the one that works best. I don't know.
Mike, I saw that you unmuted yourself before.
Mostly just a +1. Also, the platform spec has a bunch of tables in it, and I always find those really useful to read from.
Cool.
Colors could be nice too.
Okay, nice. So I hope that I'll be able to convince Emily about this. I'll let you know in the afternoon. Thank you all for your feedback.
Looks like we lost Joe, but he put stack packs and PR 505. Did he put stack packs? I thought he did because he.
Yeah, he must have. I didn't do it.
And I moved my item under it, so because I'd rather hear about stack packs.
Okay, it looks like he was talking about the run analyze before detect. So maybe he was just checking in on that, but we sort of went over that earlier. So maybe we addressed his concerns with getting it unblocked with the spec stuff. So I'm gonna have to bounce myself, so I'm gonna leave, but I'll see y'all next time.
I noticed there's also this Google Summer of Code. I think I'm gonna have to. Does anyone know? I feel like Javier will know the answer about whether Buildpacks project is participating in that. Bye.
Yeah, I wonder. I hadn't. That's one of the reasons I was pulling mine down, was to see what we could have folks work on for that. Do we? It's usually have to put in like a proposal or something that would get accepted.
I was gonna put in a proposal for the life cycle, and then I didn't, and I went on vacation, and I'm worried that the deadline passed, and so I don't know if we are able to participate or if someone else did. I'll just ask Javier.
Yeah, maybe we can fall under the umbrella if he put in a request.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe Joe did. I think Joe probably put in something broad. I'll just ask Joe or Javier. I'll sign it to myself. Any possible Google Summer of Code project ideas that are a subset of stack packs? It's very interesting.
Windows. No.
Really?
I'm super interested in how to do it for Windows, but I might be the only one.
All right, I guess we can move on to the retry fetching images. Actually, Micah, since you're here, maybe you have some thoughts on this. Dan, I can share my screen. Dan isn't here, but he very bravely took on this issue, which I can now, if I opened it, to look into why when you're running a bunch of Buildpack builds in parallel, you sometimes get EOF errors. And he dug into it, put his findings here, and is kind of unsure about how to proceed. So I think we're sort of in the help wanted phase of wanting, people with experience in these issues to opine.
I'm just reading through it myself now.
Sure.
I remember some of the background context, but seeing the latest.
Yeah, it's this.
Yeah, I don't think this overlaps with too much that I've done before. Yeah, Dan had reached out about testing strategies for it, and I saw that there was some low-level stuff you could do to get it in and reproduce this kind of situation, like make every fourth connection fail or something like that. But don't know that I could weigh too much in on the proposed solution. I'll have to think about it though and comment.
I do think his first comment there about the easiest solution being a little bit gross. I don't know. I think that's maybe a subjective mischaracterization. I think that is the easiest solution, and I think that that is the solution people would opt for a lot of times, just because it's covers a lot of things, right? Not just this EOF error, but like other networking errors, right? That could possibly happen. And those are just my thoughts there. Thinking maybe I could talk to Dan about it. Anybody have? Nope.
That sounds reasonable to me. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like especially it's super expensive to rerun the entire command. So doing an internal cheaper retry feels like it makes a lot of sense.
Maybe I'll put that in. Maybe I'll put it in the comment. Maybe that's a better place for this kind of thing. And I'll point to other examples in other code bases where that sort of method is employed. And again, it's not just because of the EOF error. It's just because networking, you can have plenty of other random types of errors, and you sort of want to catch all. That's the reason. Sorry, I'm explaining it out loud because I was trying to get my thoughts on it right now.
It's in the Wink code. I remember there's like an exponential backup there, like 3 retries or something. I think Arjun put that in.
I remember the idea of like doing retries, but yeah. Exactly because of such thing that you're doing the retry and then it fails and then now what?
Yeah. I just want this flake to go away. Like, don't make me look at this same failure again. That's fair. All right. If there's nothing more on that one, I think we can go on to the image util registry trust helpers.
Yeah, and I can share my screen for that, I suppose. I'll just open up the PR. One second, sorry. Gotta get the right PR. All right, let me share screen. Okay. Sorry for the black on white. I'm trying to fix that right now. The gist of the changes are to make image util support non-local host scenarios for the registry helper. Don't know if y'all have used the registry helper too much or got into the guts of it, but for some reason, I feel like I've had to touch it a lot over the past year or so. It's this one. This is my branch version of it. But it's used, this one in particular is used both in the image util tests and in the lifecycle tests. You mainly call Docker, new Docker registry. This is the new signature for it, but you make a new registry instance and then you start it and then you stop it. And in the meantime, while it's running, you can query the registry instance that it returns for the port and then write images to that port. By default, there's no authentication on it. So it's a little insecure to start up a registry instance and leave it on a CI machine somewhere. Potentially an attacker could go and write images to it. So some changes were made to it before to make a different constructor that automatically puts authentication on it. And it sets these environment variables inside of the registry container image to enable the authentication, tells it to use that written in password and stuff. So, but the changes that I'm trying to do here is to make it work more than just on localhost, to open it up so that, say, for instance, our analyzer tests, which are create other containers, run analyzer in its own container, and then has analyzer reach out and talk to the registry container. Right now it does that through a local host, just like network host on both those connections. So they think they're on the same local host. And so when analyzer is talking to the registry, it thinks it's on a local host port. Like most Windows things, that cool functionality doesn't quite work. So for Windows, the analyzer container needs to reach over through a real network and then talk to that registry container. Technically, analyzer running in the container can actually talk to the host's port, to its own host's listening port. And so a lot of the changes are to make that scenario work, where a container can talk to another container, but through a port on the host. So the bit of change that lets that happen is through this Docker hostname function. When you do registry start, the container that it creates won't assume it's localhost. If any of these conditions are met, you have a Docker host environment variable set. In that case, it assumes it's going to be on that IP address of that Docker host. If this host.docker.internal name resolves, then use that one. This is a new rule that deviates a little bit from the original implementation, that it will query the daemon. This is assuming it has access to the daemon. It will try to query the daemon and look at its insecure registries entries and look for any with a /32, meaning it's an exact IP address. It will use that one. And the logic there is that in order to have a insecure registry instance, your daemon needs to be okay with writing to it. And so if you went through the hassle of putting that entry in your insecure registries for your daemon, then that's very likely to be the daemon's IP. So it's a little bit of a trick where you can let the daemon tell you what its IP is without a Docker host and without a host.docker.internal there. There's not really another easy way to look it up through the daemon's API that I could figure, but this is kind of maybe a little tricky, but it kills two birds with one stone. If you set up your daemon right, then it knows where to look for that registry and where it's going to be listening. If all those fail, go back to localhost, and this is what would happen on Linux. If you're using -- network host, then as long as none of the rest of these are set, and this is like the Linux default, CI default, probably all of your workstations default, none of these will be set, then it'll work for that network host scenario. That some of those might be assumptions. If y'all feel like any of those rules are not accurate, feel free to let me know what you think.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts around the third one for
Mhm.
sure. The exact IP match. I guess the thing is, right, you're making these rules based on conventions, and the other three ones make sense. An environment variable, Docker host, this alias, local, right? Those make sense, right? But this exact IP one, we're sort of assuming user behavior on that, right? And it's not clear that that's a convention that people put /32 in their insecure registries. You could put all entries. You could put 000/0. You could put a broad thing, right? So I guess what I'm just thinking is this behavior is, unless it's documented or something, it needs an explanation, right?
Yeah.
Which,
Ye-
okay, sorry.
No, I think that's right on the money. Like it definitely feels sort of surprising. It also, for me, it was not the original thing that I went with. I just happened to notice as I was trying to set up over here in Lifecycle on the corresponding draft PR that will use this, that I was adding some duplicate, or what felt like duplicate code for the GitHub Actions workflow. I was trying to find the IP address. So in order to, like I said, for a daemon to write to an insecure registry, it needs, as you're saying, it needs either a wide open CIDR block, or it can have a very, very specific entry. So the way that we're doing that over here is looking up the IP address of the host. We're trying to do this most secure version of that, which is look up the IP address of the host. So not everything can write, or not everything can use the daemon to write to an insecure registry somewhere. It's like, just pick this very, very specific IP, which is write to your own, write to registries on this exact machine. So we look it up, we put in a /32. And then what I was about to do was to add the code to trigger this, the host.docker.internal rule. Sorry, wherever this file is. And I lost track of it. Oh, I think it was back here. I was trying to write the code to trigger this host.docker.internal rule, which would be define host.docker.internal on this Windows machine. But then as I was doing that, I realized that it's writing the exact same value with the exact same intent in two different places. Whereas if you write it correctly into your insecure registries, it becomes a single source of truth for this special exception to insecure registries.
Yeah.
So you're totally right. It should be documented. It's also not intuitive. Definitely could be overly clever, but it's nice in that it is a single source of truth if you follow this pattern. And it's as secure as possible that we can get away with. Technically, if you did want to have a wide open insecure registry entry, which technically is the case in my workstation right now, you could do 0.0.0.0/0 and have a host.docker.internal. The test would still pass on your machine, and maybe that's more conventional, but it's a little bit insecure to have that wide open of a insecure registry block, is what I was thinking.
No, listen, I dig completely. I think you're making a lot of sense. I would really like other, maybe other parties to weigh in on this. I don't feel like I should hold this up at all. I'm just saying what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is you have a very base. I don't know if other people who are going to be consuming this and running these tests, I wouldn't want code that fits one person very well. That's what I feel like is happening right here. I would want, you know, you would have to have your hook. You know, you have workarounds, right? You have workarounds to get around this. Maybe it sucks for you, right? But the opposite is you put this very tricky code in that who knows who else will understand, right? But that's
Yeah.
just my perspective. That really is just my perspective.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Now the catch is if we don't do this, we can't run tests on Windows. And that feels worse than sort of the tricky bit of the code. It's definitely like cost value trade-off. And my feeling is like the most secure way to allow us to run the Windows tests is to have a very tight and restrictive insecure host allowance. That's like the one, I think, intractable bit. So the most specific that you can make that possible feels like the easiest one to justify in terms of jump through this extra weird hoop for Windows, but don't make your machine insecure while you do it. I guess what we could potentially do if we wanted to narrow it down and not support or remove some complexity out of here is remove some of these other cases, maybe remove host.docker.internal. Technically, we could have it not even try to read from the daemon host too. And we could just say, to your point, you know, don't configure it for Micah's machine, configure it one way that we support and document the heck out of it. Like for CI, this feels like the easiest rule to write. And the least insecure way that we can leave our CI runners up there. So I would also be fine to remove all the other cases except for this one.
Like I said, you have good points, and I really think there's a cost value thing being discussed here. And I know you have a hard blocker on like how do you run your Windows test. I've said my piece. I would like other people to weigh on it, especially people who deal with this code a little bit more. I feel like does that make sense? Maybe bring it up again in another working group. You know.
So the other catch is like these PRs have been up for like 2 weeks. I don't want to force anyone to make a decision on something they're uncomfortable with, but like there's a point at which I probably will just remove these PRs and not have the test run on lifecycle. So I don't know what the right trade-off is for time investment versus come up with a way to do it versus have the acceptance test not run for Windows.
No.
I mean, I like, well, since we're all VMware employees here, like our team is dissolving. Like, I don't know what team I'm going to go into next. I'm sorry, I realize we're recording this too. I'll stop talking. So apart from team dynamics, there are pressing forces outside of this way. I would like to get something up there. So I'll stop talking. There's one other aspect to this that might be interesting if we're okay to switch.
For what it's worth, I feel good about these PRs. There's some part of that I didn't understand, which I hope to, but in general, I think this is a good approach.
Yeah, I wonder if this would be good, like a demo topic or something like that. I do really want the experience of running the test against Windows to be as close as possible to Linux. So I would like to show how close they are. You know, it looks like we're almost at time, so I'll save the second part for some other time.
Mike, I might reach out to you with a couple questions that I had about both of these before, you know, signing off on them. And I assume Emily's going to want to look at them too, but she's already provided feedback. So I can follow up with her too.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Should we adjourn? Give a few minutes back. Thanks,
Sounds good.
everybody.
Yeah.
I think so. See ya.